Scientists have made a groundbreaking discovery, the bones of what looked to be a new human-like species.
A tomb that was discovered.
An unexpected revelation has shaken what many believed about the ancestral roots of the Cherokee people. What began as a routine genetic survey intended to map Native American lineages suddenly turned into something far more disturbing. Hidden threads of migration, assimilation, and identity that run far darker than the proud oft-told narrative of the Cherokee homeland in the southeastern United States. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. In laboratories where DNA sequences are compared and ancestry percentages calculated, the results began to tell a story nobody anticipated. Instead of straightforward lineage tracing that aligns with the established oral histories and traditional accounts of the Cherokee Nation, the data seemed to hint at major admixtures, previously unrecognized population shifts, and in some cases ancestral connections that stretch beyond what scholars and tribal historians considered plausible. Genes that were assumed to reflect purely indigenous North American origins instead appeared tangled with deeply ancient Eurasian, Near Eastern, and even Mediterranean markers. Some markers linked to regions such as Egypt or the Levant, and while genetics is never direct proof of cultural or tribal identity, the presence of such markers among people identifying as Cherokee cannot be ignored. A 2013 survey noted high levels of haplogroup T commonly associated with populations in Egypt among test subjects who claimed Cherokee descent. These findings upend much of what had been taken for granted. The commonly accepted model says the Cherokee are an Iroquoian-speaking peoples who either migrated southward from the Great Lakes region thousands of years ago or developed in situ in the southern Appalachian region for millennia. The DNA suggests, however, that the story might be far more complex and darker. If markers showing unexpected lines of descent are accurate, they raise questions about ancient displacements, covert assimilation, and perhaps unacknowledged cruelties in the formation of the community. Imagine a world where, instead of the clean narrative of people of these mountains, the Cherokee lineage is revealed to include the whispers of lost outgroups swallowed into the tribe, survivors of previous civilizations, migratory populations with doomed fates, and forcibly displaced groups whose memory has been erased. The genetic tapestry starts to show obscure threads of trauma, perhaps enslaved peoples, conquered tribes, colonizing waves that have been obscured by the later dominant narrative of sovereignty and survival. There is the suggestion of betrayal, ancestors forced to renounce their original identities, or merged into the Cherokee polity under duress, becoming invisible to official histories, yet visible in the double helix of the living. One of the most unsettling implications is that some of the people counted as Cherokee may be descendants of others whose stories have been lost or deliberately suppressed. The dominance of one narrative, the proud tale of indigenous resilience, may have masked entire layers of subjugation, exploitation, and genetic incorporation of outsiders. If the DNA reveals admixture with populations not historically documented in Cherokee accounts, then it suggests there were unknown episodes of colonization, alliance, intermarriage, or forced inclusion. Perhaps conquerors or refugees who merged with the tribe under catastrophic circumstances. Perhaps clans whose memory disappeared, leaving no oral tradition but leaving genetic traces. There is also an implied moral darkness. When human populations shift in violent or oppressive ways, the survivors are often those who manage to blend in, adopt a new identity, and bury their past. The DNA evidence suggests this may have happened among the Cherokee. Maybe entire families, entire lineages went through assimilation. Kidnapped children, captive tribes, refugees from distant lands, or even runaway slaves merging into indigenous groups. In each case, the genetic record may carry the echo, even as the spoken stories have been muted or lost. The suggestion is chilling, that some of the community's strength may come not just from resisting colonial pressures, but from absorbing and silencing older tragedies. Further, the implications for identity are profound. If your DNA shows unexpected ancestry, what does that mean for your sense of self? What happens when someone believes they are purely Cherokee by heritage, only to find markers that connect them to ancient Egyptians or Mediterranean traders? It raises questions of purity, lineage, and who gets to define belonging. The mainstream narrative of the Cherokee as one continuous indigenous people may now look more like a palimpsest, overwritten layers of identity. There is a fragile line between pride and ancestry, and the unsettling realization that identity may have formed through trauma, loss, and hidden assimilation, rather than solely ancient continuity. From a broader historical vantage point, the genetic revelations challenge the assumption that indigenous populations remain genetically isolated until European contact. The presence of markers tied to Africa, the Near East, or Europe suggests far older networks of migration and population movement than previously accounted for. These networks may have moved into North America, mixed with indigenous groups, and become part of the heritage of tribes such as the Cherokee, without being recorded in oral histories or recognized in historical documents. The discovery further raises uncomfortable questions about colonial narratives. If indigenous identity is not as genetically homogeneous or isolated as long supposed, then the romanticized version of pristine native communities separated from external influence is called into question. The notion that the Cherokee or any indigenous nation left to themselves in their ancestral homelands untouched by outside bloodlines is improbable. Instead, the genetic map hints at junctions of displacement, forced migrations, assimilation, and survival under duress. What makes these findings especially dark is the suggestion of erasure. If some ancestors arrived under circumstances of defeat or coercion or as captives, then the identity that survived is one shaped by trauma. The absence of oral acknowledgement of these events doesn't negate them. It may highlight the wound itself. Communities often suppress painful memories, rape, enslavement, forced marriage, with silence that spans centuries. Here, the DNA acts as a silent witness. This witness cannot be ignored simply because it remains unspoken. Equally sobering is what this means for tribal membership and for belonging. Official enrollment criteria within the Cherokee nations depend on lineage, documentation, and historically legitimized ancestry. Often anchored to federal roles, genetic confusion exposes the inadequacy of these criteria. If one's biological ancestry is more complex and mixed than previously understood, then the frameworks of membership may become unstable. It is a reminder that culture, language, community, and political sovereignty matter more than simple DNA percentages. Indeed, the agency lies in self-identification and communal acceptance rather than genetic cry. The Bureau of Indian Affairs and many tribes reaffirm that DNA tests are inadequate or irrelevant for determining tribal belonging. The moral weight of these revelations also extends beyond the Cherokee. If this level of complexity is found in one of the most documented Native American tribes, then countless other indigenous peoples may similarly carry hidden genetic legacies of mixing, forced assimilation, or forgotten alliances. The romantic, sanitized version of indigeneity, untouched, pure, ancient, does not hold up. The past appears messier, darker, more entangled. And the fact that genetics has now caught up to this entanglement forces a reckoning of identity, of belonging, and of history. The DNA revelations might also rewrite migration theories. The simplistic assumptions that Native American populations migrated across the Bering Land Bridge and then fanned out into the continents with little external contact may require revision. The Cherokee data suggests that other population flows, perhaps maritime, perhaps via North Atlantic or Mediterranean vectors, may have reached the Americas and left traces. That implies that the peopling of the Americas might have been far more complex and far less isolated than the standard narrative indicates. Furthermore, the narrative of land, displacement, and homeland takes on new tones. The Cherokee removal from their southeastern homelands, forced march along the Trail of Tears, and resettlement in Oklahoma are well known. But if the tribal genealogical foundation itself includes absorbed peoples, whether refugees, captives, or defeated antagonists, then the dislocation narrative is doubled. Not just forced relocation, but forced adoption of identity, forced forgetting of prior identity, and survival within a subordinated structure. This is psychologically devastating. The homeland you cling to may have been built, partially, upon erased lives. The darker side of this DNA revelation includes the possibility that the warm oral legends of shared ancestry and clan relationships may mask older, unspoken histories of violence. The myth of a single ancestral homeland may conceal the ghosts of defeated populations subsumed into the tribe. The genetic evidence may be an archive of those ghosts. Each ancestor's sequence may carry a story of captivity, of migration under harsh conditions, of blending under coercion, all of it muted in spoken tradition. At the same time, this revelation does not diminish the legitimacy or pride of the Cherokee people. It complicates it. It shows that identity is resilient, that cultures survive through adaptation, transformation, and even absorption of others. But it also demands acknowledgement of the deeper shadows. That survival may have meant absorbing victims, reinventing ancestry, rewriting history. This is not easy. Few communities want to publicly explore the parts of their past that are shameful, traumatic, or destabilizing. Yet the DNA does not lie. It waits. The extent of these genetic findings forces a dramatic reevaluation of what origin means. Origins are not static points, but convergences of movement, conflict, assimilation, and survival. The Cherokee as a people did not spring fully formed from the Appalachians. Rather, they emerged through a process of many peoples coming together, often under duress, to form a collective identity. The hidden layers implied by the genetics suggest that some of the most painful aspects of that process, forced displacement of one group by another, abduction or assimilation of lesser-known populations, remain unspoken. The idea that the Cherokee are singular and unbroken runs contrary to the messy evidence of the double helix. This narrative also brings into focus the power of silence. What is not spoken often becomes what defines the identity. The documented Cherokee history is strong, with language, clans, traditions, governmental institutions, and land ties. But beneath it lies a substratum of unarticulated genetic reality. That gap between documented culture and hidden biology is itself significant. It underscores that belonging and peoplehood rest on more than genetics. They rest on story, culture, recognition, and communal memory. A DNA result may reveal a marker, but it cannot reveal the story that connects that marker to lived experience. And if that story is missing, the silence becomes part of the identity. It is important to note that these revelations were not immediately shouted from the rooftops. The genetic evidence came slowly, through studies that questioned previous assumptions about Cherokee ancestry. Some controversies erupted over the commercial use of DNA tests to prove tribal identity, with tribal nations rejecting such tests as valid for membership. The revelation is darker precisely because it comes not from headline-making sensationalism, but from quiet genetic evidence that challenges deeply held beliefs of continuity and purity. What this means for individual identity is profound. For someone who believes they are full Cherokee, to discover admixture, whether of European, African, Near Eastern, or other origin, can trigger identity shock. But identity is not just biology, it is the acceptance of community, the culture you inherit, the ancestors you honor. The darker history revealed by DNA need not create shame. It can deepen the sense of resilience. It reveals how survival has been multi-layered, how cultures have absorbed trauma and still persisted. In academic circles, the revelation forces historians and anthropologists to reconsider their frameworks. The tidy categories of Native, European, African, Asian blur in the face of mixed ancestries that precede modern racial categories. For the Cherokee in particular, the implication is that their standard origin story may need revision. The migration from the Great Lakes, the settled life in the Appalachians, the forced removal. All these may be built on a far more complex foundation of human movement, mixing, and survival. Genetic shadows of ancient populations may linger in communities that today identify as Cherokee. While the darker aspects lie in hidden trauma, erasure, and forced assimilation, there is also hope in these discoveries. If identity is not destroyed by mixing, then cultural survival gains a new dimension, one of adaptability and inclusivity. The Cherokee, like many nations, may have absorbed other groups, but in doing so, they preserved a peoplehood. That strength is perhaps more remarkable when understood in the light of complexity. A people who survived not just external colonial pressures, but internal layers of absorption and transformation. To look ahead, this revelation demands humility. For tribal nations, it means acknowledging complexity rather than casting the past in simple terms. For individuals, it means understanding that ancestry is rarely pure or linear. For all of us, it means recognizing that identity is made up of both visible and invisible threads. Sometimes what is not spoken holds as much weight as what is. The DNA evidence for the Cherokee opens a door into those invisible threads, and walking through it means facing truths that are uncomfortable but ultimately richer and more honest. The event of the DNA revelation did more than shift scientific understanding. It cracked open the mirror of identity for the Cherokee people and beyond. It confronted assumptions, unearthed hidden histories, and forced communities to grapple with the fact that origin is not always a proud line of continuity, but sometimes a twisted path of survival, assimilation, and remembrance. In this lie the darker shades of history, but also the deeper colors of resilience. The revelation's deeper significance lies not only in its scientific value, but in what it reveals about the human need for certainty. For generations, the Cherokee origin story has been both a map and a shield, a way to locate the people in history and to defend against cultural erasure. When DNA results introduced ambiguity, that shield cracked. Beneath it emerged a truth that identity has never been singular. It has always been an evolving synthesis of survival, choice, and adaptation. This confrontation between genetic evidence and collective narrative is more than an anthropological debate. It is an existential one. It asks how a people continue to define themselves when the ground of their ancestry shifts underfoot. The study's methodology, sampling mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome markers, allowed scientists to look far beyond recorded history, reaching into the deep past of human migration. As they compared sequences, certain patterns appeared that did not fit neatly into known Native American haplogroups. Instead, these patterns suggested contact or integration with populations whose genetic signatures originated across oceans or through forgotten routes of travel. The implications point toward ancient intercontinental exchanges long before European colonization, hinting that early transoceanic contacts may have occurred in pre-Columbian times. Whether by drift, trade, or shipwreck, those interactions left a biological footprint that endured in the descendants who became part of the Cherokee lineage. What emerges is a vision of the ancient Americas far more interconnected than once believed. The Appalachian region, ancestral homeland of the Cherokee, might not have been as isolated as traditional archaeology assumed. Genetic clues imply that waves of travelers, perhaps displaced or exploratory groups, entered and settled among indigenous peoples, introducing new genes that quietly persisted. Over centuries, oral traditions lost those details, leaving behind a simplified mythos. The darkness in this realization lies not in the mixing itself, but in the forgotten circumstances that produced it, the wars, enslavements, or desperate migrations that erased one identity to preserve another. The revelations also shed light on how colonial disruption reshaped genetic and cultural inheritance. Long before official U.S. removal policies or the Trail of Tears, smaller waves of displacement had already blended diverse populations together. European traders, African fugitives, and members of neighboring tribes all interacted with Cherokee communities. Some were integrated, others absorbed by force or necessity. The genetic evidence captures those intersections in ways written records never could. It suggests that even in eras of fierce boundary keeping, life at the margins was full of exchange, of bloodlines, languages, and secret alliances forged in the shadow of survival. For historians, this complexity means confronting uncomfortable layers of cultural memory. Myths of pure lineage or untouched ancestry crumble under molecular scrutiny. The new picture is neither simple nor flattering. It shows a people forged through continuity and rupture alike, shaped as much by loss as by persistence. Yet in acknowledging that, the Cherokee story grows more human, not less. It transcends the mythic isolation of ancient tribes and enters the universal narrative of humanity's movement, mingling, and transformation. The darkness, then, is not merely genetic but moral, the realization that even the most cherished identities carry within them histories of violence, assimilation, and silence. It challenges the tendency to sanitize heritage for comfort or pride. DNA exposes that truth with unflinching neutrality, showing that ancestry is a record of both the oppressor and the oppressed, the victor and the vanished. For the Cherokee, the revelation demands neither shame nor denial. It calls for recognition. Within those molecular traces lies an unspoken testimony that survival, however fractured, has always been the essence of identity. The genetic revelations also invite a new form of storytelling, one that embraces contradiction instead of fleeing from it. By tracing these ancient and unexpected connections, the Cherokee past transforms from a singular path into a vast network of crossings and convergences. Every sequence of DNA becomes a fragment of migration, endurance, and reinvention. This deeper understanding dissolves the illusion of purity and replaces it with complexity, showing that the Cherokee identity, like all human identities, is an evolving mosaic. In this recognition lies a powerful truth. The shadowed origins revealed by science illuminate the extraordinary depth of what it means to endure. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the DNA test revealing the Cherokee's true origins? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.